Hello everyone. Today I'm very excited to share with you my new pattern, which is a mix and match Regency dress pattern for plus sizes. Now this pattern is very similar to my last mix and match Regency dress pattern, except this time I have expanded the sizes to accommodate plus sizes. Now this pattern is meant for someone between a 42-inch bust up to a 56-inch bust, and there are a few variations to the pattern pieces to accommodate for bust size fullness. And this pattern does include 1, 2, and 3 dart bodice variations. There are also variations to accommodate a C, D, or double D cup size. And there are 4 sleeve styles and 4 skirt styles. So you can mix and match all of these pattern pieces to create your ideal dress. Now I'm very excited to introduce this pattern to you, show you how to assemble it and take your measurements, and I will briefly touch on some construction points. But if you're looking for a more detailed step-by-step process, then I definitely recommend you check out my previous 5 videos for my mix and match Regency dress pattern. The pattern pieces and the construction will be much the same. But otherwise, I'm very excited to introduce this pattern to you a little bit more and share the process with you. So let's get into it. First off, I would like to introduce this pattern set in a little more detail. This pattern set is called Mix and Match Regency Dress Pattern for plus sizes. And this pattern set can be found in my Etsy shop as a downloadable PDF. I will add a link below in the description box. The pattern set is comprised of 17 PDF patterns, all of which make pattern pieces that can be mixed and matched to create your ideal Regency dress. This set includes patterns to create a bodice with either 1, 2, or 3 darts to shape the bust, and there are 3 bust fullness options for either a C to D cup, D to double D cup, and double D to triple D cup. It also includes patterns for 4 sleeve styles, the puff sleeve, fitted sleeve, cap sleeve, and flutter sleeve, and patterns for 4 skirt styles. The 2-part skirt, which can be made with or without a train, a 3-part skirt, which can be made with or without a train, the circle skirt, or the ball gown skirt. Each pattern piece is a separate PDF which will need to be selected, printed, and then assembled. Next, I want to share some examples of the bodice with 1, 2, or 3 darts, and some examples of the 4 sleeve types, just to give an idea of what can be made using this pattern set. This pattern set is very similar to my previous mix and match set, but there are a few key differences. This plus size version only offers 4 sleeve styles, but it does offer 3 bust fullness options for the bodice. Both pattern sets do offer the same 4 skirt styles. And a big difference to keep in mind when sewing is that the previous mix and match Regency dress pattern is meant to be sewn with 1 centimeter of seam allowance, or 3/8 inch. However, this plus size pattern set is meant to be sewn with 1.5 centimeters of seam allowance, or 5/8 inch. Please remember this change in the seam allowance when watching any of the videos, and use the correct seam allowance for the pattern you are using. Feel free to watch my previous mix and match Regency dress videos for more detailed step-by-step instructions on how to make a dress for the 2-part skirt, 3-part skirt, circle skirt, or ball gown style skirt. I will be adding links to these videos in the description box, but again, keep that seam allowance in mind. In this video, I will just be briefly touching on the construction and showing some examples of completed dresses using this pattern. Next, I'm going to demonstrate how to take your measurements on my mannequin. You will use these measurements to select your desired pattern size. And when taking your measurements, please first put on any clothing items or undergarments you wish to wear beneath the dress and then measure, like a bra or a petticoat. I am just going to take my mannequin's measurements as is. And the measurements I'm going to take are the full bust, under bust, over bust, skirt length, and the upper arm circumference. I'm going to take the full bust measurement around the fullest point of the bust. For my mannequin, this measurement is 47.5 inches or about 120 centimeters. Next, I take the under bust measurement, which is around the rib cage right up under the bust, about where your bra band would be. And this measurement is 42 inches or about 107 centimeters. Then I take the over bust measurement, which is under the armpit and around the back and over top the bust. This is 44 inches or 112 centimeters. And this over bust measurement is going to help me decide if I want to use the pattern labeled C, D, or double D cup size. If I take the over bust measurement and subtract it from the full bust measurement, that is going to leave me with a difference. For example, the full bust measurement is 47.5 inches, and the over bust measurement is 44 inches, which makes a difference of 3.5 inches. This means I have a difference of 3.5 inches, so I want to choose the PDF bodice pattern labeled C cup. If the difference between your full bust and over bust measurement is up to 4 inches or about 10 centimeters max, then choose the pattern labeled C cup. This should work for approximately C to D cup sizes. If the difference between your full bust and over bust is up to 5 inches or 13 centimeters max, then choose the pattern labeled D cup. This should work approximately for D to double D cup sizes. And if the difference between your full bust and over bust is up to 6 inches or about 16 centimeters max, then choose the pattern labeled double D cup. This should work for approximately double D to triple D cup sizes. So the pattern size I am going to choose is size 48 with the C cup variation. This is because the pattern is labeled by the bust size in inches, and my mannequin's full bust measurement is 47.5 inches, which is closest to the size 48. And I found the difference between my full bust and over bust measurement and decided to use the C cup variation for the bodice. So that is why I'm going to be using size 48 with the C cup variation for my pattern. If you are in between sizes, then I highly recommend sizing up and of course testing the fit with a mock-up. And you may also wish to make a note of your upper arm circumference and your desired skirt length, just in case you wish to compare these measurements to the pattern and adjust it later. You can measure around your upper arm, and you can measure from your underbust to where you wish your skirt to end. Next, I'm going to print PDF patterns for the bodice, sleeve, and skirt pieces. For my yellow dress, I'm going to choose the PDF patterns labeled A4 bodice, size 42 to 48 with the C cup, A4 puff sleeve, size 42 to 56, A4 two-part skirt, size 42 to 56, and I also print the PDF for the two-part skirt train extension. When selecting the PDF pattern, I want to be mindful of both the pattern size and the paper size, which is either A4 or US letter. And I print my 4 PDFs out on A4 paper, and I make sure that the scale is set to 100%, and I also like to set my print margins to 0. And here are the PDFs printed and ready to be assembled. Before assembling, I check the measurements of the square in the top left-hand corner with a ruler. It looks good, so I can start putting the pages together to create the pattern. To assemble the PDFs into the pattern, I am simply going to trim the page margins as needed and tape the pages together to create a grid. And each PDF is going to create its own unique grid. For example, my bodice pattern is 20 pages. It is going to make a grid that is 5 pages across and 4 pages down for the total of 20 pages. And my puff sleeve pattern is 12 pages. It is going to make a grid that is 6 pages across and 2 pages down for the total of 12 pages. And the two-part skirt pattern is 35 pages. It is going to make a grid that is 7 pages across and 5 pages down for the total of 35 pages. Here you can see the 20-page PDF that has been assembled into a grid for my bodice pattern. Now I can decide if I want to make a 1, 2, or 3 dart bodice front and cut out my bodice pieces to my selected size. I will cut my pattern pieces out to size 48 because the pattern is labeled by the bust size in inches, and my mannequin's bust size is 47.5 inches, so close enough to 48. Again, I recommend sizing up if you're in between sizes. So I cut out the sleeve, skirt, train extension, and bodice pieces all to size 48. Now I do want to mention that the skirt pattern pieces are larger and will need more pages, so these can be a little tedious to assemble. In particular, I want to mention the circle skirt, which is a 54-page PDF and makes a grid that is 9 pages across and 6 pages tall. This one can be especially tricky and time-consuming. You could just print the first 2 pages of the circle skirt PDF and then draft the rest of the pattern independently if you feel up to it. This could also be done with the ball gown skirt, just printing out the first 8 pages and then drafting the rest yourself. Of course, only do this if you think you're up for the challenge. And I am also attaching the skirt train extension to the back of my skirt pieces by matching the gray stars together. This way I can cut out my skirt pieces with a train. But adding a train to the back of your dress is totally optional and up to you. Next, I'm going to create a mock-up. Making a mock-up is highly recommended. It can save you so much heartache, and it's a great chance to fine-tune the fit. At the bare minimum, I recommend you make a mock-up of the bodice pieces and check their fit. Depending on you and your taste, you may wish to make a few adjustments. You may wish to try sizing up or down, or a different cup size. You may wish to shape the neckline or the darts, or adjust the length of the skirt, or adjust the sleeves or the back for a certain back closure. I find this step very crucial and highly recommend you make a mock-up. But I am satisfied with the mock-up and the way it fits my mannequin, so I'm going to move on and start cutting out my pattern pieces from my fabric. Next, I quickly want to discuss materials. For every dress, you will want dress fabric like cotton, satin, linen, or silk, something non-stretch, cotton fabric for interlining the bodice, a zipper about 40 to 50 centimeters long, and matching thread. You may also want trim, lace, or other embellishments, or a different back closure instead of a zipper, like hooks and eyes, eyelets and ribbons, ties, or buttons, and additional fabric for making a mock-up. Now, how much fabric you will need will mostly depend on what style of skirt you wish to make for your dress. You will need between 3.5 to 7.5 meters of fabric depending on which dress and skirt style you want to make. The ball gown skirt and the 2-part skirt require the least amount of fabric, whereas the circle skirt and the 3-part skirt with the train extension will require much more. The 2-part skirt without the train will require about 4 meters of fabric. The 2-part skirt with the train extension will require about 4.5 meters of fabric. The 3-part skirt without the train will require 5.5 meters of fabric. And the 3-part skirt with the train extension will require about 7 meters of fabric. The ball gown skirt will require about 3.5 meters of fabric, and the circle skirt will require about 7.5 meters of fabric. I also recommend a minimum fabric width of 110 centimeters and avoiding directional prints for the circle skirt. Now, these are just rough estimates of your fabric requirements, and there are some factors that will help you decide if you want to purchase more or less fabric. For example, if your fabric has a particularly narrow width, like less than 110 centimeters, then you will want additional fabric. If your fabric has a nap, a particular print or design you would like to consider or match when cutting, then you may require additional fabric. And if you're taller, or you wish to considerably lengthen or alter the pattern in any way, then again you may wish to purchase extra fabric. The reverse is also true. If your fabric has a very wide width, like over 145 centimeters, then you may be able to use a little less. And if you're using a smaller size or shortening the pattern significantly, then you may be able to strategize your pattern layout and your cuts, and you may be able to use less. For the best fabric estimate, I recommend assembling your pattern first, make any adjustments that you need, and then measuring the pattern pieces. In addition to your dress fabric, you will want another meter of cotton for interlining the bodice, and possibly an additional meter for the mock-up. And while on the topic of materials, I want to explain interlining a bit more. When cutting out my pattern pieces from my dress fabric, I like to cut out an additional cotton layer of the bodice front, bodice side, and bodice back pieces. I will use this additional layer as interlining. Now, interlining is not 100% necessary, but I highly recommend it. For heavier and thicker fabrics, you may wish to forego this step, but for lightweight and slippery fabrics, I think it is a great addition, and I think it really improves the look of the bodice. I cut out one bodice front on the fold, 2 bodice sides, and 2 bodice backs from either a white cotton fabric or a matching cotton fabric. Then I apply these cotton pieces to the back of the outer layer of my dress bodice pieces. I like to pin and then baste these 2 layers together so that I can now treat the 2 layers as one. Adding this cotton layer, sort of flat lining it to the outer layer of my dress, helps provide stability, support, and structure. I think it helps the darts turn out much crisper and tidier, and it helps prevent any warping that could happen around the cut curved edges like the neckline when you handle and work on it. It also provides a little extra support to the heavier skirt and any embellishments you might add. This step is simple enough, simply backing your bodice pieces with a layer of cotton, but I think it really improves the look of the bodice and makes handling it much easier. Now I think I'm ready to start cutting out the pattern pieces. I am cutting out pieces to make a dress with 1 dart, puff sleeves, and a 2-part skirt with the train extension. So for this dress, I have cut out 3 bodice fronts on the fold, 1 for the outer layer, 1 for lining, and 1 in white cotton for interlining. 6 bodice sides, 2 for the outer layer, 2 for lining, and 2 in white cotton for interlining. 6 bodice backs, 2 for the outer layer, 2 for lining, and 2 in white cotton for interlining. 2 sleeves, 2 sleeve bands, and 1 skirt front cut on the fold, and 2 skirt back pieces with the train extension. That way the dress has a train. And that will be all the pieces I will need to make this dress. However, depending on the dress you are making, you may be cutting out different things, like different skirt and sleeve pieces. Next, I'm going to quickly go over the steps for how to construct a dress. At this point, you have printed and assembled your pattern, chosen your size, made a mock-up, and cut out all of your pattern pieces. So now you are ready to get sewing. First, I want to reiterate that you will be sewing this plus size pattern using 1.5 centimeters of seam allowance, or 5/8 inch. First, I back all of my bodice outer layer pieces with the cotton interlining layer. So I pin and then baste a layer of cotton to the wrong side of my bodice front, bodice sides, and bodice back pieces. I thoroughly pin the 2 layers together to secure, and then I baste the edges together, basting within the seam allowance. So now I can treat these 2 layers as one layer. Next, I sew the darts into my bodice front. I start at the bottom and stitch upwards, tapering my line of stitching off of the bodice, and then I tie the thread ends together to secure. Sometimes I like to sew my darts a smidge longer to help round off the point and make the dart more smooth. On this dress, I've sewn the dart about 1 centimeter longer, just to help smooth it over the curve of the bust. Next, I match the bodice side to the bodice back along the curved edges, matching the right sides together. Because the seam allowance is 1.5 centimeters, I find matching these curved edges together a little tricky. So what I like to do is carefully clip the seam allowance of the curved edge of my bodice back piece. This will open it up and make spreading it apart a little more easy, and it'll make it easier to match it to the curved edge of the bodice side. Now I can pin and match these curved edges together with right sides touching. After pinning, I stitch the bodice side to the bodice back along the curved edges, sewing using 1.5 centimeters of seam allowance. Afterwards, I like to trim the seam allowance with my pinking shears, and I'll add a zigzag stitch. Next, I match the straight side edges of the bodice front to the bodice side, and I match the shoulder edges of the bodice front to the bodice back, again with right sides together. I pin the side and shoulder edges together and then stitch, and again I'll finish the seam allowance by trimming with pinking shears and adding a zigzag stitch. Now my bodice outer layer for the dress is assembled, and I can repeat these steps to create my bodice lining. Next, I'm going to put together the sleeves to add to the bodice. First, I add a long length gathering line of stitches to the sleeve head and the bottom edge of the sleeve. I gather down the bottom edge of the sleeve so it's the same length as my sleeve band. I simply pull the thread of the gathering line of stitches to gather down that bottom edge, and as I gather, I push and massage the gathers into place evenly along the bottom edge of the sleeve. Next, I pin the sleeve band to the bottom edge of the sleeve. I want the right side of the sleeve band facing the wrong side of the sleeve, and I pin these bottom edges together. After pinning, I stitch the bottom edges together, taking care as I sew over top the gathers. Next, I'm going to fold that sleeve band over twice towards the front. I'm going to fold it once to hide the raw edge and a second time to create the sleeve band. After folding it over twice, I'm going to place that folded edge over top the gathers and pin it down in place. I want that folded edge to cover the previous line of stitching. After pinning it in place, I'm going to carefully top stitch it down. After I top stitch down that sleeve band, I'm going to fold my sleeve in half with the right sides facing each other and match those side edges together. I pin and then stitch that side edge. After stitching, I trim the seam allowance with my pinking shears and finish with a zigzag stitch for an extra finishing touch. Now I can set the sleeve into the armhole of my bodice. I start by matching and pinning the side seam of my bodice to the side seam of my sleeve with right sides together. Then working up either side of the bodice from this point, I pin the sleeve into the armhole smooth and flush. At the very top of the shoulder, I gather down the remaining sleeve head volume by pulling on the gathering stitches to gather it down. Once it has been gathered down to fit, I pin it in place. After pinning, I can then stitch the sleeve in place. I sew around the entire armhole, careful as I sew over top the gathers. And after stitching, I trim with pinking shears and add a zigzag stitch. Next, I sew the skirt front to the skirt back along the side edges. I match the sides together with right sides touching, pin, stitch, trim the seam allowance, and finish with a zigzag stitch. Then I match the skirt's waistline to the bodice's waistline with right sides together and pin. I pin the skirt to the bodice smooth and flush until the very back of the bodice, where I gather or pleat down the remaining volume. For my yellow dress, I have created 3 pleats on either side of the bodice to gather down that remaining skirt volume. I then stitch the bodice to the skirt, sewing the waistlines together with right sides touching. After matching, pinning, and sewing the skirt to the bodice along the waistline, I next add the lining to my bodice. I match the neckline of my bodice outer layer to the bodice lining with right sides together. I pin these neckline edges together and then stitch, and I'm going to sew the neckline with 1.5 centimeters of seam allowance. After stitching, I clip the seam allowance around the neckline and then press the seam allowance towards the back, the lining, and understitch it for a tidy neckline. I think understitching the neckline makes for a very clean look, and it helps the neckline lay smoothly when worn. After understitching, I give the neckline a quick press with an iron, and next I'm going to add a zipper to the back of my dress. First, I use chalk to mark where I want my zipper to end, and then I pin the back edges of my dress together and then stitch. I stitch using a basting stitch for where the zipper will go and then change to a regular length stitch and continue stitching down the dress. I press this back seam open, nestle the zipper in place into the center back seam. I pin it in place, baste it, and then stitch the zipper in place. Once the zipper has been added into the center back of the dress, I can pick open those basting stitches and reveal the zipper. Once the zipper has been added, I then like to hand stitch my lining in place. I fold all of the edges of my lining inwards and hand stitch the lining to the seam allowance of my bodice outer layer. This creates a tidy inside to the dress. Sometimes I have to clip the seam allowance of the lining to make turning inwards a little easier, and I like to take care not to stitch the lining too close to the zipper teeth. Once the lining has been hand sewn in place, all that's left to do is finish the bottom edge of the dress with a simple rolled hem, and then I give the whole dress a nice press with an iron. After adding the rolled hem to the bottom edge of my dress, it is now, at this point, completed. I just wanted to take a quick moment and show you a few details of the dress, like the 3 pleats in the back, as well as the sleeve band edges, the gathers at the shoulder, and the darts at the front of the dress. The only thing that I'm going to do extra is add a little bit of gold trim to the waistline and the sleeve band edges, just for a little extra interest and detail, hopefully to sort of create a more elevated, dressy look. And I do really like the gold trim that I added. I just used about 2 meters of metallic gold trim and top stitched it around the waistline and the sleeve band edges. Just a little something I added on at the end. Next, I'm going to just quickly give a few notes of construction for my other dresses that I've made. Now the next dress I want to discuss is my green dress. For this dress, I used 7 meters of a faux silk in light green with a width of about 110 centimeters. I also used about 70 centimeters of a light blue cotton for interlining the bodice and a 40 centimeter light green zipper. I also used matching thread and about 120 centimeters of flower trim for the neckline and about 110 centimeters of pink eyelet trim for the waistline. Now this light green dress features a bodice with 2 darts, cap sleeves, and a 3-part skirt with the train extension. I finished the cap sleeves by lining them, so I cut an extra layer of the cap sleeves pattern for lining. Then I stitched the lining to the bottom edge of the sleeve. I then clipped the seam allowance, understitched it, and pressed the sleeve with an iron. I then matched the sleeve sides together and stitched, turned it right side out, and then basted the top edges of the sleeve and the lining together. With the sleeve finished, I set it into the bodice's armhole, and I used some gathering stitches at the sleeve head to ease it into the armhole to fit. I finished the dress by top stitching some floral trim to the neckline and the pink eyelet trim to the waistline, something inspired by a dress Penelope wears in season 2. For my third dress, I used 4 meters of cotton fabric with a width of about 110 centimeters, about 70 centimeters of cotton for interlining the bodice, and a 40 centimeter zipper. I also used matching thread and 3 meters of silver trim that was 8 centimeters wide for the bottom edge, and 3 meters of silver trim that was about 2.5 centimeters wide for the underbust and the sleeves. Now I thought this light blue floral cotton was very Daphne Bridgerton inspired, so I wanted to make a dress that was very reminiscent of something Daphne might wear. So this dress features a bodice with 2 darts, flutter sleeves, and a ball gown skirt. And both the bottom edge of the skirt and the flutter sleeves have been finished with binding. Binding can be added in a variety of ways like bias tape, and it's a great way to finish raw edges. I first stitched the side of my sleeves together and then I added binding to the bottom edge. I pinned the right side of the binding facing the wrong side of my sleeve and then stitched around the bottom edge of the sleeve. Next, I folded the binding over 2 times towards the front of the sleeve to create a finished bottom edge. I then pinned it down in place and then top stitched it. Afterwards, I set the sleeve into the bodice's armhole and I used gathering stitches at the sleeve head to ease the sleeve into the bodice's armhole and pin it in place. This dress also has a lined bodice which has been understitched, and the skirt's entire waistline has been gathered down to fit the bodice's waistline. This dress is very pretty. The ball gown skirt and the flutter sleeves are both so flowy and romantic. After finishing this dress, I decided I wanted to add a little bit of silver trim to the bottom edge of the dress and the waistline and the sleeves edges to sort of zhuzh it up a bit. I added a wider trim to the bottom edge of the dress. It's about 8 centimeters wide, and I added trim to the waistline and the sleeve edges that is about 2.5 centimeters wide. I thought this silver trim added a nice decorative element to this dress. The last dress I want to discuss is this red dress. For my red dress, I used 7 meters of red cotton fabric with a width of 145 centimeters. I also used 70 centimeters of cotton for interlining the bodice, a 40 centimeter zipper, matching thread, and about 110 centimeters of golden trim that's about 1.5 centimeters wide for the underbust. Now this dress features a bodice with 3 darts, fitted sleeves, and the circle skirt. And I had Lady Danbury in mind when making this dress and choosing the fabric and trim. And this dress has the most full and twirly skirt of the bunch, and it's because it's made using the circle skirt pattern. However, this means that trimming and hemming the skirt was very challenging, and the skirt also did take a big amount of fabric. I also had to be very particular about fabric width when choosing my fabric. This is because I needed to fit the large pattern pieces that are used for the circle skirt. When cutting out the skirt, I cut 1 skirt front on the fold and then 2 skirt back pieces. That way I have a full center back seam. I also interlined the bodice using a dark blue cotton fabric, and the fitted sleeves are finished with a narrow rolled hem. I first matched and then stitched the sides of the sleeve together, and then folded the bottom edge of the sleeve upwards 2 times and then top stitched it down. Before finishing the dress's bottom edge, I put it on my mannequin and I let it hang for about 48 hours. This is because parts of the circle skirt will fall on the bias, so some stretching is bound to happen. I let the circle skirt stretch out for about 48 hours and then I trimmed it even. I recommend you measure from the underbust down to where you want the skirt to be trimmed. After trimming, I finished the bottom edge with a simple rolled hem. This part can be very tricky and tedious, and you have to be careful not to trim or hem away too much. So I really only recommend the circle skirt to those who are up for a challenge. After I finished this dress, I went back and added a little gold trim to the waistline of this dress, just something to elevate it from simple to elegant. I also hand stitched a little gem to the center front to just further zhuzh it up a bit. And I'm very happy with the way this red dress came out. I think it's a great example of how trim and embellishments can elevate even a cotton dress to something very dressy and fancy. Now basically, you can think of the construction process as 6 steps: bodice, sleeves, skirt, lining, zipper, and finishing. But of course, if you want a more detailed step-by-step instruction video, then I definitely recommend you check out my previous videos for my mix and match Regency dress. The process and the pattern pieces are going to be much the same, so you can watch those previous videos for a little bit more detailed step-by-step. Of course, keep in mind you will be sewing the plus size pattern with 1.5 centimeters of seam allowance, or 5/8 inch. And finally, I want to share some photos of the 4 dresses I made using this pattern. Each is an example of the various gowns you can make using this pattern. If you're interested in making a Regency dress for yourself, feel free to check out my pattern in my Etsy shop. I will link it down below. My hope is that you will be able to make your own unique and amazing dress. As you can see, this pattern can be used to make many dresses, and you can mix and match the pattern pieces to create your own unique design. And I hope that this video helps get you started. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video and would like to see other DIY videos or other videos where I make Bridgerton inspired dresses, then definitely like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.